Well, here I am at a tree closer to the sidewalk. I didn't like underneath the walkway because there was such an echo. It was devastating. Anyway, let's get over to Henry M. Morris. States. He wrote a number of brochures and several books. Back to Genesis, periodical number 75. Well, that's still pretty loud. I'll just raise my voice. Evolutionists have a most amazing faith. They believe that people have evolved up from the ape, or something like an ape, and that apes and other mammals have evolved from reptiles. And reptiles have evolved from amphibians, amphibians from fish, fish from some unknown phylum or multi-celled invertebrates. Invertebrates in all their phyla evolved from some unknown protozoan, and some other unknown protozoan evolved from complex chemicals, and that the complex chemical elements evolved from the simplest chemical element of all, namely hydrogen. Now, that's not a matter of scientific evidence, it's a matter of believing that this happened and then forcing issues into their model and discarding model issues that or points that don't support their belief system. So the operative word in the above sentence is believe. There is no evidence for this remarkable chain of events. Apes and reptiles and vertebrates and invertebrates and chemical elements, including hydrogen, still are here in abundance, but none of them are changing into anything else that we can observe. Neither are there any evolutionary transitions documented in the records of the past, despite olden days of mermaids and centaurs, not even in the fossils, which are purported to represent billions of years of Earth history. This remarkable chain of events is in reality nothing but a remarkable statement of faith in the great god hydrogen, the elemental substance which is supposed to be the father and mother of us all. Thus, hydrogen, the simplest chemical element, call the word simple, so the more complex. There's no evidence that things are getting more complex. We've just been going over the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy, things are devolving, not evolving. They're getting simpler, not more complex. So thus hydrogen, they say the simplest chemical element is a colorless, odorless, tasteless gas, which given 10 billion years or so produces people. Yay! That quaint definition, originally suggested by the late creationist astronomer George Mulfinger, is a cogent summary of the faith one must exercise in order to be an evolutionist. It was the prince of evolutionary astronomers, Harlow Shapley, a long-time head of the Harvard University Observatory, who long ago pontificated that people today should rewrite the first verse of Genesis. According to him, it should be something like, "In the beginning, hydrogen created the heavens and the earth." Modern evolutionary astronomers and cosmologists have thus ruled out the idea of a personal, omnipotent, omniscient God as creator of the universe. But they still have a God. His name is hydrogen. A more recent scientist has put it this way. Take some matter, heat while stirring, and wait. This is the modern version of Genesis. The fundamental forces of gravity, electromagnetism, and the strong and weak nuclear forces are presumed to have done the rest. So were they there in the beginning? What set of laws and constants did they have to assume in order for all this to happen? Andrew Scott, Update on Genesis, in The New Scientist. But this same writer, perhaps not suspecting that some creationist might happen to read his evaluation of this statement of faith, proceeds to make the following admission. But how much of this neat tale is firmly established, and how much remains hopeful speculation? In truth, the mechanism of almost every major step, from chemical precursors up to the first recognizable cells, is the subject of either controversy or a complete bewilderment. To unbiased observers, it must seem that every major step from one degree of organization to the next higher degree is not only speculative, but impossible, at least in any realistic sense. As a matter of fact, I thought about this. Probability-wise, each minutiae step would take billions and billions of years. We have innumerable steps, billions of those steps, to take billions, billions, and billions times more, far greater than people presume the universe is old. I say far greater than people presume the universe is old. That makes it impossible. The chief problem among many is the second law of thermodynamics, which notes that everything at least tends to go down toward disorganization, not greater organization. Presumably, the universe began in a very chaotic state. A chaotic state is, by definition, a state of high entropy. When we speak of chaos, we mean that there is a great deal of disorder. On the other hand, numerous kinds of structure have appeared since the universe began. But how can this be, if entropy was so high at the beginning? So Richard Morris, Time's Arrow and Scientific Attitudes Towards Time. He says, most cosmologists assume that the universe began with a Big Bang, which would seem to be about the ultimate in chaos. Explosions normally generate disorder, and this primeval explosion of nothing into something must have been the greatest explosion of all if it really happened. Cosmologists, however, have devised various curious schemes in their attempts to circumvent the second law. That most prolific of all science writers, Isaac Asimov, assumes the universe was like a cosmic egg. The ancient pagan evolutionists used to think of it in some such way also. He says the cosmic egg may be structureless, as far as we know. Gutted apparently represented a very orderly aggregation of matter. But it apparently represented a very orderly aggregation of matter. Its explosion represented a vast shift in the direction of disorder, and ever since the amount of disorder in the universe has been increasing. So, Isaac Asimov, in the beginning, he wrote a book there. A little bit further up, just how the cosmic egg could have no structure and yet have a high degree of order is not clear to me, but of course, I am an ignorant and biased creationist. Neither is it clear how this vast shift, there's my head, toward disorder somehow produced all the highly ordered systems in the universe, including human beings. To Asimov, however, it was quite simple. Within the vast shift toward disorder involved in the Big Bang and the expansion of the universe, it is possible for there to be local shifts in the direction of order, so that the galaxies can form, and within them individual stars, including our sun. Well, perhaps it may be possible, but no one yet has been able to explain how. Nobody really understands how the star formation proceeds. It's really remarkable. That's Roger A. Windhorst, as quoted in A Matter of Timing. One of the great successes of evolutionary cosmology is the supposed ability of the Big Bang to explain the origin of hydrogen gas, and this is always offered as one of the three proofs of the Big Bang. The others are the background radiation and the supposedly expanding universe, both of which, however, have also been explained by certain rival cosmologies. But that's not all. That's all. Thus we are left with hydrogen as the originator of everything else, and even though we don't know how it did this, as an article of faith we are simply to intone the evolutionary mantra, in the beginning hydrogen. A lot of presumption there. That belief is supposed to be more credible than in the beginning God created. One wants to be charitable, but it is hard for the Christian not to recall certain scriptures at this point. For example, because they received not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this cause God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie. And professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. Sounds like politicians. And changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man. And perhaps the saddest aspect of this whole scenario is that so many Christians are being taken in by it. For example, a currently popular evangelical scientist seemed to be echoing the atheist Asimov when he defends the Big Bang and the whole system of cosmic and stellar evolution. He says, what Dr. Duane Gish and others fail to recognize is that the hydrogen which forms by God's cause and design 1 millisecond after the universe began is much more ordered and less entropic than the galaxies, stars, planets, and life-essential elements. The galaxies and stars are broken up pieces of the primordial gas cloud. The planets and life-essential elements are the burned-up remains of ashes, in other words, of hydrogen gas. Thus, the Big Bang manifests itself rather than violates the second law of thermodynamics. Wow. Hugh Ross, Creation and Time. I'm not making this up. That paragraph is really quoted verbatim from a recent book. Hugh Ross believes that the obvious conflict of this concept with the second law is resolved simply by the postulated heat energy in the Big Bang. The key word, once again, is to believe. He would like for us to believe that stars are broken up pieces of the primordial hydrogen, and that our own living bodies, with their life-essential elements, are the burned-up ashes of hydrogen gas, because that's what the secular astronomers who rejected the God of the Bible must believe. And he believes we should not question their and his authority. One cannot help but think of another verse of Scripture, for they love the praise of men more than the praise of God. And so God placed the curse on man and on his whole environment, thus forcing him to recognize the seriousness of his sin, as well as his helplessness to save himself and his dominion from eventual destruction. The necessity of laboring merely to keep alive would go far toward inhibiting still further rebellion and would force him to recognize that Satan's tempting promises had been nothing but lies. Such a condition would encourage him to a state of repentance toward God and a desire for God to provide deliverance from the evil state upon which he had fallen. So, in the animal and plant kingdoms, likewise, limitless proliferation would be checked by these new factors of disease, predation, parasitism, and so on. Had the fall never taken place, animal life would no doubt have remained constant at an optimum population by divinely directed constraints on the reproductive process. Now, however, God's personal presence is to be withdrawn for a time, and it is more salutary to maintain order by means of these indirect constraints associated with the curse, adding still further to the testimony that the world was travailing in pain, awaiting its coming Redeemer. Thus, the entire creation was made subject to vanity. The earth began to wax old as doth a garment, and ultimately shall perish. Since all flesh is made of the earth's physical elements, it also is subject to the law of decay and death, and as grass withereth and falleth away, it will do the same. It is universal experience that all things, living or non-living, eventually wear out, run down, grow old, decay, and pass into the dust. This condition is so universal that it was formalized about 100 years ago by Carnot, Palacios, Calvin, and other scientists into a fundamental scientific law, now called the second law of thermodynamics. This law states that all systems, if left to themselves, tend to become degraded or disordered. It has been called the law of morpholosis, and from a Greek word meaning loosing of structure. Physical systems, whether watches or suns, eventually wear out. Organisms grow old and die. Hereditary changes in the species are caused by gene mutations, sudden random disruptions in their highly ordered genetic systems, which in many cases have resulted in deterioration or extinction of the species itself. Even apart from mutations, the deterioration of the environment has often led to species extinction. Warming up a little bit.